because I see a very sumptuous meal of pounded yam. Also, he had a very nice plate of dessert, and if you can go through the Hoover app, you'll see what people have been going through during lunch. I'm sure you know the tradition, and if you don't mind, I'll crave everybody's indulgence again. If we can all please just stand up for our second challenge, I'd appreciate that. If you can just stand up for just 1 minute, please, before we proceed to our next session. Bring out your smartphone. Yes, a selfie time. And just simply turn and just take a picture with whoever is next to you, or beside you, behind you, wherever. Feel free to take with the SBL chairman or anybody in the room. And kindly just post on the Hoover app. Would appreciate that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. A round of applause. You guys have been an amazing crowd. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, Bukola is just having one more. Okay, so moving on to our next session. It's titled The Nigerian Startup Bill, Economic Enabler. This session is sponsored by Odujiri Adefulu, Bank of Industry, and G. Elias. Can we have a round of applause for our sponsors, please? Without wasting time, I'd like to call and introduce the moderator, Mr. Davidson Oturu, as a partner with Alex. Mr. Davidson Oturu, please, a round of applause for you. If you can join us, sit in the middle or wherever you feel comfortable. A round of applause for him, please. If my ushers can help me just, serve some tom-tom around the room, I'd appreciate that, and let's get the energy back up. The next person I'm calling is the Head of Compliance for Smile Identity, Mr. Kazim Sodongani. A round of applause for him, please. I hope I got the name correctly. Please do. I'd appreciate that. The next person I'm introducing is the Country Director of the UK-Nigeria Tech Hub, Daisy Sokan. A round of applause for her, please. This is where you say Sean for the officer. The next person I'm introducing is a retired colonel. A round of applause for Colonel Phoenix Oregene Alaita, SSA to the President. Sean, sir. Last but definitely not the least is the CEO of TZPay, Mr. Musa Ali Baba. A round of applause, please. As we always say, all the profiles of our speakers on the Hoover app, kindly click on agenda and the topic and you see their profiles. Mr. Oturu, over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope we've been having a very good time with the different sessions, and I hope that this goes well. I'll first of all start by congratulating the people who are on this panel today. They all worked tirelessly day and night towards the Nigeria Startup Bill being where it is today. And most of us woke up to the news yesterday morning that the Senate had passed the Nigeria Startup Bill, and it is now going to the House of Representatives. And as an executive bill, a lot can come out of that because there can be easy passage. So please, can you just one more time put your hands together for these lovely people that are here? All right, so without much further ado, I had to write down most of the questions I'm going to put to them because they all play different sides to what we're seeing today. Kazim Sodangi, for many years, worked at NIDA. In fact, while he was at NIDA, he was the national coordinator for the Office for Nigeria Content Development. A lot of words there, but while he was there, he was overseeing NIDA's efforts in driving the development of local capacities in Nigeria. So with that sort of background, there are a lot of questions that can be posed to you. Somebody who goes through the Nigeria Startup Bill would see that a commission was not set up. An agency wasn't set up for the purpose of monitoring or implementing or trying to make sure that the bill works. Rather, the powers were resident in NIDA as a body. But if you also go through the bill, you will see a couple of provisions there that deal with tax incentives, they deal with pioneer status, and a few other incentives that are there. Now, do you think a bill like the Nigeria Startup Bill would create conflict of functions and power tussles between the different MDAs that already exist in Nigeria?
Thank you very much, Davison. And it's a pleasure to be here to have this conversation. I'll say that first, I mean, we have too many quangos, right? And the Orasonye reports is clear that we have too many agencies, or rather we need to rationalize, to streamline, have a slimmer government and so on and so forth and take advantage of efficiencies. So the primary instincts were not such that we wanted to create, in looking at the bill, create new agencies or new departments of government, while we already had so many and some were properly resourced, to be able to administer some of the core ideas, or to sort of, if you like, and it's answering the B part of your question, to realign all the stakeholders into working together, for the benefit of the ecosystem. Very simply, what was identified early on in crafting our startup bill, I keep saying that the startup bill is not an overtly ambitious bill. It's a very measured bill to deal with what is, or what is really still is, the most pertinent issues for startups and technology-enabled startups in Nigeria. And it was just a question of policy alignment. I mean, all the macroeconomic challenges are still here, but they still find a way to get money, to raise capital, to invest and get some returns. They will flourish better with the better macroeconomic environment, but the challenge had been the discrepancy in policy. It's either something on crypto or something about securities and micro investing, or another thing about the BVN or another. So it was just one thing after another. So at the core of the startup bill is just this ability to corral, to have this platform where you can have nuanced conversation across departments of government, to have an understanding of what the needs are, data-led, data-driven needs, and how policies should align, and you can avoid cognitive dissonance, just dissonating ideas that then hamper the entire space. So in short, in summary, is that the bill is to align, and there are agencies of government that have that capacity. They should have the skill and take advantage of the instruments of government to align various policy silos as they exist, to be more, there's more cohesion, to grow and remove some of the inhibitors to startups achieving what they should in the economy.
Okay, so let me stay with you briefly because you've touched on a couple of things, and I'll still sort of backtrack a little bit on my earlier question. I know that the Nigeria Startup Bill provides for a national council of, that is supposed to have some overseer functions within the bill. Would you say that that council makes it easy to coordinate most of the government bodies that may be involved in probably trying to give incentives to the startups or trying to make the ecosystem thrive or work as it were?
So the simple answer is yes. The council is, and the president sits as the chair of the council, and the vice president, who also leads the national economic team, sits as the alternate chairman of the council. So it means that whatever is agreed at council level will typically percolate, across and downwards. But there are also interesting sort of mechanisms in the bill, like the consultative forum, and it is also the first council where representation to the council will be by an election of peers. So startups that are registered as startups in Nigeria form part of a consultative forum, and there are benchmarks for this, and can vote people into that council. There are also other mechanisms like a management agent that checks, that provides report independently of what council is doing. So that way, I'll say yes, the council provides that type of platform that can drive, that progressive policy development and implementation.
All right, thank you, Kazim. Let me come to Adaeze. Can this? So let me come to Adaeze now. Now, I know that for many years you were the executive director at Venture Platform Foundation, which is a sort of VC body that aids and helps early stage startups. And while you were in that position, you were responsible for sort of midwifing this whole process. Can you take us through what you had to consider when putting together the team, as well as the process that would lead to the crafting of the Nigeria Startup Bill?
Yeah, it was a very interesting process. When I started at Ventures Platform, actually my first day at work, there was a strategy session, and my boss then, Kolaino, asked, my role then was Director of Policy, and he asked me, what is the one thing you want to achieve with policy? And I just said a Startup Act. This was about 5 years ago. And it will not materialize until 5 years after. And so we start off, a young man called Oswald, who is the SA to the president on digital transformation, gets his job and he feels he wants to do something for the ecosystem. And we say, look, let's try and get the Startup Act to work. And so we started, and that's the first thing. The first thing I would say is you don't underestimate the person who has a yes we can mentality. Because at the time it seemed very, very impossible. And I'm sure most of us, there are certain bills or policies that we want to pass, and you're just at idea stage and you're not sure how you will start or how it will end up. And that's how it felt at the time. And so the second step was we had a buy-in. So we had somebody in the president's office I don't think I've met anybody as relentless as Oswald, who has strong buy-in, who saw the vision and wanted to make this happen. And you had folks in the ecosystem. We realized quickly that obviously we needed everybody to be on board with this. So we constituted a presidential strategic advisory group or council, which comprised of every person. Everybody seated here is on that council as well, and different aspects of the ecosystem. We had representatives there because this wasn't something that would be championed by one organization or just a certain group of people. This is a bill that was called everybody's bill. In fact, the underlying philosophy is a big tent approach, meaning this is a bill owned by the entire ecosystem. So we couldn't move without considering the opinions of everyone. And this Strategic Advisory Council was responsible for providing guidance, opening the doors. They were influencers in their own rights, sowing the seeds for what will now become the bill in its full-blown state. Once we had everybody's buy-in, we needed expertise, right? Because all of us, we didn't realize how much we didn't know more about the process. I remember Kasim one day on the WhatsApp group was like, I think we had drawn up a plan with certain timelines, and Kasim, you were like, I think you guys need to be educated on the process of passing the executive bill. So we had expertise like Kasim, we had ALX group helping with drafting the bill, and we had this other group called I4 Policy, who is an international organization that helped other African countries design startup acts and frameworks in Senegal, Tunisia. And we listened to them, we had a conversation, we had meetings just to design what the framework would be. So having that expertise was very key because we also didn't know everything. And after that, we started to form and we needed an engine room, right? The secretariat, which I was very privileged to manage and lead. And we had never done a bill before. And I remember praying that, God, you have to help me. I sat down on my dining for like 6 hours, just mapping out the framework for that secretariat. It was completely run by volunteers at the time. We didn't have the funding, so we would do our day job during the day, and then at night we were on calls, just working on, organizing different town halls, mapping out different activities, having timelines, communications, engagements, different things. And it's interesting how that foundation at that secretariat has led to the thousands of volunteers that we have now. And all the engagement was happening on WhatsApp group. We didn't have the money, but that didn't stop us. It was just this attitude and culture of willpower, of vision, of passion, and relentless pursuit. After that, obviously, we know we needed money, but we didn't let that not having money at the time stop us from taking steps. And then after that, we started to have conversations with different partners. We wrote different concept notes, different pitches, and we're having meetings every day talking to different partners. But it was interesting how when we mentioned it, people wanted to be part of it and jump on board. And we were lucky enough to get support. We got support from the UK Nigeria Tech Hub and the West African Research and Innovation Hub, and from Google. That was the first financial support. Other organizations also came in and gave different in-kind support. So it was a huge rallying and buying from the ecosystem. We had people wanting to volunteer, media support. And I think that's what makes the Nigerian build. I think it was Tech Hive Advisory that released the reports as the best process, because it was well organized, very flexible, very nimble. But at the same time, you had everybody's buy-in. Everybody owned the bill. From every nook and cranny of the country owned it. From even the government's MDAs, we had different meetings with MDAs, the president's office, the vice president's office. So that collective ownership and buy-in is what makes the bill stands out, and one of the best projects I've ever worked on.
All right, fantastic, and that was very enlightening, because it showed us how there was a lot of collaboration that led to the formation of that bill. Even though there was something that you said concerning money, and you mentioned money maybe like 2 or 3 times, and I was wondering, but startups are supposed to be the in thing. They're the ones who are making money, right? I mean, last year, it shows that I think maybe close to $4 billion was raised in Africa, and 60% of that, Kazim just told me 5.1, and about 60% of that, was raised for Nigerian startups. So, that means that, well, this guy has his numbers, he said 32%. So that means that startups are making money, so it's sort of hard, being able to reconcile that with the
They
fact
eventually brought in some startups support,
Some
but
startups
there was bias and bad perception. There was mistrust, so it took some time
for them
to
buy into the process.
buy into the process.
So let me still stay with you briefly, right? What provisions of this bill would you say you're really excited about, and how do you think they are going to help the startup ecosystem as a whole?
Yeah, so I'm excited about all the components of the bill, honestly, but 3 stand out for me. One is the council that's supposed to provide oversight, and I like it because as much as I'm very particular about everybody coming together to pass a bill, to pass policy, I'm also, success for me is when the policy is implemented, and I know that that's a very big challenge. And I see that the council, if ideally it's well formed, well constituted, well designed, comprises of all the key agencies and departments and members of the ecosystem who will continue to have conversations, right? To provide context to the deliberations, to hold ourselves accountable to implementing the bill. So if it's well designed, it means that we can not eventually just have a piece of paper. We would actually have a bill that works for the ecosystem and that we can track over time. So I'm excited about that in the context that it works.
It works, right? It works.
So and we believe that it will. So it's the same value of faith and vision and collaboration that we're hoping will continue towards implementation, because that's when we can say we've won. Second is the startup support and engagement portal, which is really interesting. This is, I think, for the first time you have a place, almost like a one-stop shop place where startups are there, VCs are there, hubs are there, policymakers are there, and people can easily obtain licenses, ask questions, get feedback, on access opportunities. So I think it's a place to bring everybody together. So far, we've been working in silos. I think the startup bill has taught us that if we're going to really move mountains or do anything very significant, we need to be talking to each other. We can't be everywhere. So I think that portal helps to do that. Again, how it's managed is very key. And the last one for me is the seed investment fund. I think it's the fund where this time around government is now putting money where his mouth is, right? So it's not just investors giving us money, which we're not saying is bad, but now government also contributing to early stage financing for startups, especially at the idea stage where the risk is still high. So having government play in terms of putting money in startups, I think it's something that's interesting. And ensuring that that's sustainable is also very, very key. So I think those are the three that stand out for me.
Brilliant. And thanks for giving us of that. Now, when we were coming up, one of the last things Kasim said to me was that I shouldn't ask him anything around implementation of, of the bill. So I would go to Colonel Felix, who is Senior Special Advisor to Mr. President. And, he's not, I don't know if he's a card-carrying member of APC, but that will not affect my next question to him. Everybody has heard Mr. President from time to time. I mean, he's speaking about the youths of Nigeria. I mean, he had once said that youths are lazy, but he later changed that, there's been a lot of statement from the presidency that they're backing this bill. And to validate that, this bill is an executive bill in itself, which means that it has been sponsored by the presidency itself. So my question to you is this. What is your take on government's commitment to creating an enabling environment for startups and tech-enabled businesses? Now, the reason why I'm asking you this is for anybody who advises startups and tech-enabled businesses, we've seen what happened with cryptocurrency companies. They were flying high, people were buying Bitcoin, but then the government woke up one day and said people who trade with cryptocurrency can not hold bank accounts in Nigeria. We saw the freezing of accounts of RiceVest and Chaka and a few other startups. And there's that there almost seems, sorry, Colonel, I'm not putting you on the spot, so don't, but since I have you here, let me just ask, what would you say, with all of this background, is government's commitment to ensuring that there is that enabling environment for this bill to not just work, but to benefit startups and tech-enabled businesses? Colonel, sir.
Let me follow your style and just say government is committed.
You just sounded like your principal. Please expatiate, Colonel. And don't vex for me after this.
If a government has been able to, shall I say, work with the general populace, right, in the big tent approach you've mentioned, to create a bill that is supposed to empower our youth, I already see that government as being committed. The bill has gone to Senate, it's been passed at Senate, that's commitment. The bill includes an aspect that enables government to pay part of the startup industry by providing that seed fund required for any early stage, anybody in fact, that has an idea and thinks that that idea can solve a problem in our society to start a company. That is commitment, right? Sustenance is a different ballgame. But if you say is government committed, I will simply say government is committed. Let's not forget that government is an evolving situation. So my answer stands for now.
That government is committed. Thank you. Thank you. You're a politician, sir. Thank you. I'll come back to you later. So let me go to Musa. Musa is the founder of MTZ Pay, which has benefited from VC and angel funding, and also a non-executive director at FSDH, so sufficient experience in the financial sector. But let me ask you this. The Nigeria Startup Bill is where it is now. Would you say that if a bill like this existed, it would have aided your company and other fintechs and startups to scale faster? And what really are your expectations from the bill as it is now?
Thank you very much. So, to be clear, I started out with TZ just over a decade ago, and I have transitioned, and I'm in the process of starting something new. Now, at the time that we started, and I think it's the story of many entrepreneurs, it's not an easy journey. It's not an easy journey. you have a lot of difficulties. You encounter so many conflicting rules. You are, by chance, depending on what regulatory framework you work under, you may find that there are contrary ones operated by another agency, and you have no single filter through which to go. You need incentives. At the point, by its own nature, startups lose money in order to grow, to gain money. At the point where they're losing money, the last thing you need is to come and be, in essence, extorted, because it's going to be difficult for you to deploy the money where the growth is supposed to be. And this was our own experience. Already before transitioning, I thought to myself, look, this is, it's not for the faint-hearted. And if I was to do it all over again, I wouldn't, or I would take a different path. But there are many youth in Nigeria. There are more youth than there are available jobs in the conventional industries and government. So entrepreneurship, we all agree that entrepreneurship is a path. But guess what? There's a fear of failure. The data shows that fear of failure is one of the biggest impediments to getting people to grow. And the failure comes from certain structural factors. The aim, if we've done it before and seen these experiences, is to ensure that it does not happen for the next generation. So what we are doing through the Startup Act is to create that enabling framework for them. To put it in another way, you cannot legislate everything onto paper. You need that flexibility, because in the startup space, there are so many fast-changing things. Even we changed our business model a couple of times over the years to adapt to situations. And then, of course, there was COVID, which changed models all over the place again. You can't legislate that, but you can allow for some flexibility. So this is the story of every entrepreneur. No entrepreneur had it easy. And while we all had difficulties, our difficulties were nuanced in different ways, but this act is set up to allow that flexibility for most of the common problems to go. Especially, just like you were talking about access to capital. At various points as you're growing, you run out of cash, right? But you're a risky prospect for either an investor or a financier or a bank or whatever, and you want something that helps to reduce or de-risk you in the eyes of that financing group. The hope is that by being in this transparent, structured form through the Act, you can be a less risky prospect, or a prospect that can actually show the track record you've achieved as an indication to where you're going to go. I don't know if, I could go on for hours and talk about different things, but I'll pause and let the questions flow.
Definitely. You can. And I'll still come back to you, but let me just move to Cornell again, because he did mention something about the investment seed fund that is provided for under the startup bill. Do you want to just speak, a little bit about that? Kasim will also have a jump to that question, but I want you to also get it from your own perspective, because you did mention, it as one of the incentives that could potentially, be beneficial to startups. Just to expand on it a little bit.
Okay. Basically, I think there's a general trend worldwide that startups are the new thing. So everybody wants to be a startup. So one of the things that this bill does is to provide an enabling environment for everybody to try. But however, there are processes to being a startup that most people do not know. One key thing that people should understand is that 75% of the startups worldwide fail. Most of them fail between the formation stage and the scaling stage. These reasons for failure are clear: lack of efficiencies, lack of funding. The startup phase that starts up the whole process requires funding, which is called seed funding. Seed funding includes funds that you own yourself, funds that you get from your friends, funds that you take loans from banks, or as we normally just say, family and friends, right? Government has now decided to be part of that group of family and friends that provides seed fund. That's a good thing, because that's where the most risk is taken. The stage where you have an idea, that you don't know if it has a product market fit. You have no minimum viable product to even showcase that this is the idea you want to bring to solve a problem. It's a very risky stage. Government is putting together a fund that will be matched by anybody interested, other third parties interested, to provide succor for our young people who don't have such seed fund for themselves, or who don't have family and friends who can raise funds for them. The platform will provide an enabling environment that will harness them, coach them, guide them, so that the fund is not wasted. But the key thing I will just bring out here is that the idea that that fund is going to sustain a business through its lifespan is a fallacy. Seed fund is for you to find your minimum viable product and get ready to scale. If third parties don't come into the equation, venture capitals, accelerators, to train these startups that will come on this platform now to understand that transition between that phase and the scaling phase, they will fail, and the seed fund will waste. If they are trained and they learn the efficiencies they need to scale as a business, then they have to seek for venture fund to grow the business. Government cannot provide that. Our limitation stops at seed fund.
Okay. Okay, fantastic, and thank you for being able to expand on that. I almost feel like also setting up my own startup so I can benefit from the seed fund. But Kazim, so let's say now I fully decide to set up my own startup. Where will this funding come from? And I'm asking, and these are questions that I'm sure that a lot of people ask. There's industrial training fund. I don't know how many lawyers here have to advise their clients around what that fund is and why they need to pay it and whether they even see any benefit in it. There's NSITF. You can say, okay, Social Insurance Trust Fund, but then how many people are able to access it? Even NIDA has a fund too that, and they collect from different places. So what makes this seed fund, Cornell has spoken around it. Why do you think this would work, number one? Number two, where will government get the money from to seed that fund?
Very interesting questions. So thankfully, is this working? Yeah, but okay. So can you hear me? Okay. So thankfully, you didn't.
Sorry, Kazim. Maybe you use mine.
Thankfully, you didn't ask me what does the industrial fund do. I mean, but so I think Connell has described what the mechanism or how the seed fund should work. I would only add it slightly stretching the idea that I do consider Series A early stage somewhat. It will act also as a diversifier of the fund and it would further de-risk the fund in the sense that, typically when you go into a Series A, you have a bevy of investors who are limited partners, to the ticket. So I would say that, the fund should contemplate Series A. But I would say that the expertise of that fund lies in the institutional capacity of the administration of that fund. I do think that's why the NSIA, from the perspective of government, is one of the most suitable. I wouldn't say the only suitable, but in my perspective, probably the right fit. And that's where the fund sits. So the experience of fund managers within the NSIA, the Sovereign Investment Authority, which is the Sovereign Wealth Fund, would provide the philosophy of the fund, and will create sort of what the value drivers of that fund, will be. Those are sort of the soft issues that will determine, and I'm sure it will be driven on research and data, as possible. Fund simply spilling the fund in ventures that are not even plausible in themselves. So I do think that the philosophy of the fund is very critical. The way the fund is couched and coded in the document is such that the fund doesn't necessarily need to come from government. Sometimes, I'm even wary of funds that come through the normal budgetary process of government because it's then subjected to some of the other requirements of procurements and so on. And I do think, personal opinion, our procurement laws are broken, right? And so therefore, I do prefer a system where when any money is fired into that fund, it is primarily seen as grant and not a subvention. It gives the Sovereign Wealth Fund the sort of freedom to design the fund mandate in such a way that it is nimble and practical and is not, you don't have to do some of those things that has created this cartel we see around procurements, right? And where people can mask a business opportunity to look like a startup because it knows that it will draw down once it meets the black letter requirement of whatever, the law requires. I mean, forgive my skepticism. So I do like the fact that the fund sits with the NSI and is allowed to craft what the fund mandate is, and the fund mandate will be such that whatever monies are fired into that fund is not subvention, but it's a grant that goes into a fund that sits alone, and then it will be administered per the mandate of that fund. That sort of creates some kind of room for competence, for capacity, sustainability, and then for the sort of creativity that is required to administer a fund of that nature.
All right, thanks. If you want to clap like you, oh, wow. Folks, man. No, it's always nice hearing Kazim speak, he has all these sweet words, he will just be dropping, But yeah, but thank you for expressing that. And when I saw Tumanele that earlier in the last panel, I would have asked him about the NSI, the NIDA fund. But you used to work in NIDA now, so I can still ask you. Should I ask you about the NIDA fund? Okay, so let me ask you about the NIDA fund, right? And that's because NIDA does play a role in this, framework and all of that. The NIDA fund, I know that, certain percentages from the revenue of companies, what's that fund going to be able to do for the ecosystem, that they're doing at the moment? And how does it feed into this whole, framework that has been set up with the NSB?
So, I'm not holding brief for NIDA, but because it's a law, so I can speak for it. I can speak about the law. So the technology levy is the 1% profit before tax of certain financial institutions, telcos, licensed telcos, pension fund administrators, and technology companies. In the law, it's called cyber companies, very amorphous, who have operations of more than 100 million naira annually. It's a profit tax, essentially, and it goes into the NIDDEF, which is the Nigerian Information Technology Development Fund. That fund essentially provides the funding for the activities and the mandate of NIDA, essentially. So it operates as a statutory fund, and NIDA is supposed to administer it based on its mandate. Now, a broad reading of Section 6 of NIDA's Act enables NIDA to create programs and ideas and concepts and fund, and by concepts I do not mean business concepts, but developmental concepts, because the law itself, the NIDA, the act itself is a developmental act, to be able to draw from this fund. The idea of NIDA is that there are certain industries that typically are sort of frontline and benefit from the advancement in technology or the growth of technology in an economy. Those frontline agencies contribute so that you can bake a bigger pie. That's the situation. So NIDA can, through its budgetary process, amongst other things, including administrative costs that it has to deal with, allocate certain capital or certain, if you like, a grant, through a grant process to the NIDDEF. So that's sort of the relationship, right? NIDA will be putting that money in, it can do other certain procurement things, but if it's specifically for driving the fund, it has to be through a grant process in accordance with the mandate, either approved by council or administered by NSIA.
Thank you. Brilliant, Kazim. Thank you for that. Time seems to be evading us, and it's amazing how time flies. So let me come to our Daisy before I go to the Hoover app and look at some of the questions there. Presently you're the country director for the UK Nigeria Tech Hub. can you just speak a little bit around what you do really? What does that tech hub do?
Okay, so the UK Nigeria Tech Hub is an initiative of the Digital Access Program, which is an initiative of the UK's government in Nigeria. And the mission is to support a prosperous digital economy. And I lead that and on 4 main areas. One is talent development, just to ensure that we have skilled talents, tech talent, both tech and non-tech talent, to create jobs. Second is to support startups, whether it's through early stage financing, supporting angel investors in the ecosystem, and connecting startups to opportunities both home and in the UK. The third is policy, and so that's why we're able to support the startup bill, because we understand the need for enabling regulatory environment. And the last is just fostering linkages, so startups looking to expand to the UK or to access other markets to support that. So that's what the UK Tech Hub does. And the idea is, okay, we work with partners as a partnership approach, don't necessarily implement directly. So we find people who are doing things around these pillars and who align with our objectives and results. And we provide funding and capacity support so that they can scale the impact of the work that they're doing.
Okay, brilliant. That means that if my startup comes to you, I can get something from you.
No.
Okay.
So we don't support startups directly. We support people who support the ecosystem.
Man, okay. Well, thanks.
It's not an investment firm.
So I have to be supporting something. Okay. Now, I know that the startup bill provides for accelerators and hubs, and incubators as well. Can you speak a little bit around how this would work with the Nigeria startup bill and what the effect of that can actually be to the ecosystem?
I know that the bill has provisions for hubs and accelerators and recognizes them as a very crucial entity when it comes to building local digital economies. And we recognize that. In fact, when I designed my strategic plan, it's not influenced by my own thinking or just the UK government's thinking. We look at the national plans on ground, we look at the laws and align with that. So that's the first step. But we do actually have a plan to support hubs fully, strongly this year. But in the area that the hubs are playing a very key role in boosting their regional economies, sort of strengthening the competitive advantage of their regional economies. For example, if Araria market is thriving and it has lots of business owners and SMEs there and there's commerce that's thriving, we would be looking for a hub there who would, for example, would be supporting talent or startups to develop digital infrastructure that just provides solutions for the supply chain of Araria market so that it can do better and grow that local economy while also enabling export, for example. So that's the type of support, for example, would be keen to see hubs have versus just, just beyond just capacity building. I think there's been a lot of support from us as well in terms of building their capacity, but I think we need to take it to a point where hubs are now, more entrenched in really contributing to economic growth in terms of job, in terms of revenue from the taxes that the businesses are paying attention to, and also closing the market gaps in those local economies. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Can we just put our hands together for, when sometimes you just want to clap for some people because what they've said just makes a lot of sense. So I can see the clock winding down, and though I still had a number of questions, let me just take these so that I do not abuse time. Okay, I will put this to Musa. And so there are 2 questions here. One says, do we really need a startup law? Another one said, what is the essence of a startup bill? So maybe you can just take them since they're probably 2 sides of the same coin.
Okay, thank you. First of all, to ride on Adeze's point, I personally am a beneficiary of work that the UK Nigeria Tech Hub has because they supported the Africa Angel Academy. And when I was leaving my job, one of the things I wanted to do was give back to entrepreneurs by way of angel investing. And they gave me the capacity to do that, and we've taken it some way forward. And we even got mentorship for that through the efforts of the hub. So just to say, there are real beneficiaries here, and you should look into it. To the question of whether we need a bill, earlier on I spoke about the uncertainties, right? And I would say that these points still remain relevant in this case. I'm saying we don't have to have a law that is a handcuff or a shackle. We have to have a law that allows us the visibility. What do we need as startups? We need to collaborate. There's a lot of interesting thing going on across different parts of the country that we don't necessarily know about. I started in a silo, many others like me did, right? But even in the work, we come from different backgrounds. We started to see what each other was doing. We went to every zone in the country to have town halls. From those little engagements, people in one zone saw what people in another zone were doing, and they started to work together. And it's not just among the entrepreneurs. We need the collaboration. It's been said, government has been spoken of, entrepreneurs have been spoken of. There's the academic institutions, there's the financiers and risk capital. They're not sitting at the table, corporates, they're not sitting at the table right now in any organized fashion. This bill allows us to all sit together because wherever you go, where there's a successful startup ecosystem, anywhere in the world, all these groups of people are sitting and talking together and planning and making out strategies together. And by setting a bill up like that, it's a very important step towards having us understand each other's issues. We're sitting, forgive me, in a business law conference. Matters of IP will become very critical as we go forward. And the bill enables this kind of discussion and the framework around which it is to be done to work. We want to export, just like was said, other countries want to see our innovations. Our innovations are there. We need to make sure that the IPs are strong on those innovations. How do we do it? If we just go through the traditional route to the patent office, it's not quite a straightforward conversation. But when we sit together, the Ministry of Trade, along with all the other areas, not just NIDA and the Ministry of Communication and Digital Economy, each side is seeing what is important to the other side and why it matters that they help that side flourish. We as entrepreneurs would like to see this, put our things on the table, have our representatives, have where these conversations and policies are being made, and this gives an enabling setup for that. So there's the collaboration, there's the intellectual property, there's the finance that was earlier spoken to, there's the inter and intra and cross-geographical collaboration, stakeholder collaboration, the table, the big tent. Everybody now has their words can be listened to. I think that is the best way to summarize this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Musa. Very, again, if you want to clap now. Oh, don't mind it. Okay. Sorry, Bukola, when it says time up, does that mean we should just be going? Or oh, okay. So, just to be sure. Let me throw this to Kazim, and Cornell can probably chip in. So the question is, I believe tech startups in Nigeria can contribute a great deal to our external reserves as a nation. How can we ensure this through our laws? This person probably read the article, the newspaper report that our debt profile is more than our revenue. So the person is worried, So do you want to speak on that?
I can try. So clearly, if you take trade and this whole conversation around the AFCFTA, under the services component of trade, there are what is typically understood as the four modes of supply: consumption abroad, cross-border trade, movement of businesses, movement of persons or capacities. The first two, consumption abroad and cross-border trade, speak to the capacity to drive revenue or to earn revenue from outside your borders by providing services from within your borders. The best example of businesses that can do this easily or facilitate this will be tech. One, if you take, for instance, travel and everything that happens on the travel portal from Travel Start in Nigeria, you have Waka Now. You know, that is an example of e-commerce and technology working together with the buy travel industry and tourism industry, you know, to facilitate, you know, access to even capital to Nigeria. The other is our data centers, or even just the work of our startups being able to provide services, build capacity, and provide services across the border. So first, the simple fact that startups can drive earnings in foreign exchange means that they can improve greatly our net revenue and improve our balance of trade positions. You know, so a focal strategy should be, you know, as part of the AFCFTA, is to drive this component of technology so that we can earn more FX, you know, automatically when we earn more money, you know, through the mechanisms of the central bank, you know, it then, you know, drives and improves our balance of trade and our earnings. So that's just even a simple, very straight line, you know.
Yeah, very straight line example, yeah. You know, I was just thinking of what would happen if one day you are a minister. Nigeria will do well. And you will give me a job too. Colonel, do you want to jump in here or?
Yeah, let me just take a different approach, right? Drawing from my principle, the idea of foreign.
Please don't draw from him, please. I beg you.
Excuse me. The idea of focusing on funds coming in from outside, to me, has an Achilles heel to it. It's well known that startup funds that come do not really come. Am I correct? It's resident in New York, it's resident in Delaware, it's resident somewhere else, but it doesn't really come into the country. However, within country, there's a lot of funds that is lying down doing nothing. In my previous life, I was approached by a company that came in from Italy who wanted to invest in a portfolio we're building, and what they told me was that they do not mind one-digit interest return on investment because they have funds sitting down doing nothing, all the way from Italy. Within Nigeria, we have a lot of people with such huge funds that are doing nothing. This platform that the Startup Bill creates brings awareness, like Musa has mentioned, brings awareness, brings protection, brings understanding that your funds that you invest in a startup will not suddenly disappear. That awareness, to me, will be able to create situations where we have more angel investors coming up within country. We have more VC firms rising up within country. Now, if those kind of firms come up and are able to harness enough capital to fund startups, the funds will be within country. The return on investment will also be where? Within country. So that's my own take on that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. The red that is blinking on that time up is really scaring me. Yeah. So I will probably just throw one last question, and I will go to Tadaize, really. But Musa can probably chip in, but Tadaize. So this question says, do we have a universal reach for the startups? Because it seems only the startups in the urban areas and cities benefit. How do we address this?
That's a very good question. I'll answer it in two ways. First, remember again that the entire design of the bill is one big tent approach. This is everybody's bill, whether you're a woman or man, whether you live in a remote area or not. And we started showing this by ensuring that we organized town halls. We wanted everybody's voice and opinion to feed into the bill. So we organized town halls in different regions, in all the 6 geopolitical regions. But also we had state champions. So there was a champion in every state that organized the ecosystem to ensure that they contributed or they were part of the regional town halls. Because you could have a regional town hall in Lagos, but it's not, involving or including everybody else in the region. So it was very important that we had representatives in each state. And so all the town halls held, and we made sure that everybody's input was given to the bill, and that fed The other thing that we also quickly realized is that you have a startup bill that's national does not mean it will trickle down at the state level. And so a discussion around state adoption started even as we were drafting the bill. Lagos jumped on board to domesticate the bill. Kaduna has jumped on board as well. Edo State, Anambra, can't remember the others. Kaduna, yeah.
No,
so
Yobe came on very quickly, which speaks to the question itself.
The question. So I think and that shows a lot of interest and spread. So the idea is that every state would adopt the bill. But the good thing with Kaduna, and I think Mr. Musa is going to talk more about it, is that it wasn't the state that sort of influenced the state adoption in Kaduna. Yes, they had the buy-in, but you had the ecosystem actually approach the government to say, hey, this is happening, can we also domesticate our bill? So even if in your state it doesn't seem like the state is driving it, there's work for the ecosystem there's citizen engagements, right, that needs to happen to make things happen in your state.
All right, thank you. And much as I would have loved to hear Musa's take on this, and probably even get questions from the audience, the people that brought us here have said, look, it's time up, so we have to call it a day. No last words from any of the speakers, because they are very brilliant and intelligent. Or can they have last words? No, okay, none. So none at all. So thank you. It's been our pleasure bringing this to you, and feel free to ask any of them questions. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much. Please, let's give them a round of applause while they take pictures. And then shortly after they take the pictures alone, I would invite the executives of the NBA-SBL, as well as the representatives of sponsors, to please join them. This insightful session was sponsored by Odujuri and Adefulu, Bank of Industry, and GLIS & Co. Round of applause for our sponsors, as the representatives of our sponsors join in for pictures. Okay, great. A round of applause for our sponsors as they make their way down. Please, would like you to visit the green room. The ushers are here to direct you to the green room. Thank you. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we're now moving on to the next plenary discussion. This one is focused on the Petroleum Industry Act, making it work. The Petroleum Industry Act, making it work. And this session is sponsored by Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, Chevron, Total Energies, Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board, and ESSO Exploration and Production Nigeria Limited, operators of OML 133 in production sharing contract with NMPC and SNEPCO. So ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our sponsors. Thank you. And for our coordinator, Miriam Salami. So I now invite the moderator as well as the panelists to take up this session. The moderator for this session is Ms. Jumoke Fajamirokun, partner at ENR Advisory. Thank you. Okay, the energy is building up post-lunch, and I know that it will continue to build up as I invite other speakers. The next speaker, the panelist, is Ms. Tola Taiwo, Senior Counsel at Shell. A round of applause, please. Up next is Mr. Charles Nwachukwu, Chief Legal Officer, Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Agency. On this panel, we also have Dr. Habib Nuhu, Executive Commissioner, Nigerian Upstream Regulatory Commission. He's joining us virtually. A round of applause for him, because the virtual audience can see us and they can hear us. And last but definitely not the least, Dr. Adeoye Adefulu, partner at Odujuri and Adefulu. He's also joining us virtually. And I'll be handing over to the moderator.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Permit me to stand on existing protocols. Once again, my name is Jumoke Fajemirokun. I'm a partner at ANI Advisory, and I'm excited to be moderating this panel on the Petroleum Industry Act. As we all know, the Act was passed in 2021, and it was a long time coming, and it completely overhauls the legal, regulatory, fiscal, and institutional framework for the petroleum sector. There are a lot of benefits that come out from the Act, but at the same time, there are challenges with its implementation. So this panel discussion will highlight some matters arising from the implementation and just discuss issues around that. So we have a distinguished panel of speakers, and they will be allowed to introduce themselves shortly and the nature of work that they do in relation to the PIA. But before we dive in, I've been asked to give a brief introduction, a brief background on the PIA, just for the benefit of everyone in the room. And so, as I mentioned earlier, it's a bill that has been, or rather an act, still getting used to calling it an act. It's an act that has been a long time coming. It had been in the works for about 20 years, and finally it got passed into law in 2021. It changes the governance structure for the petroleum industry bill, creates new institutions to regulate the upstream, midstream, and downstream segments. We have representatives from the regulatory institutions here, Mr. Wachuku and Dr. Habib, who's joining us online. It also creates new licenses, a new licensing framework for the upstream segment, basically changing the nomenclature from oil exploration, oil production, oil mining leases to petroleum exploration, petroleum prospecting, and petroleum mining leases, and provides for a stricter acreage management regime. So if you don't use it effectively, then you stand the chance of, you risk losing it. What's interesting about the bill as well is that it provides extensively for the midstream segment, creating a new licensing regime for gas that did not exist before. And also we have provisions around economic regulation, so price regulation, competition regulation, as well as access, third-party access regime. It also touches on host community relations, which it has been a touchy topic over the years, and provides for the creation of a host communities development trust where operators are required to contribute a minimum threshold of their operating expenditure into that fund. And most importantly, introduces a new fiscal regime. Upstream operators are no longer, well, if issues around conversion, but if they choose to convert to the PIA licenses, then they will no longer be subject to the petroleum production, petroleum profit tax, and there's a new hydrocarbon tax together with the company's income tax that will apply, depending on the terrain that they're operating in. And also we have new innovations like a decommission and abandonment fund and the likes. And so, without further ado, I'd like to turn on to the panelists now. And first, I'll be asking them to reintroduce themselves and let us know the nature of work they do or have done in relation to the PIA. And if we can start with our panelists that are present here. Mr. Wanchuku.
Thank you. Good evening, all. Yes, my name is Charles Wanchuku. I'm with the NMDPRA. I have core responsibility for stakeholder engagement and regulations. So what we try to do is basically meet with all our partners, companies, holders of our licenses, and give them a sense of the direction that we feel the industry should be going. We have regular conversations with everyone, including the NDA and other industry bodies, OPTS and IPPG alike. We're also, like I said, we also work on our regulations. Quite a few of them have come out now, and that's what we're really up to right now. Thank you.
Ms. Taiwo?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Aditola Taiwo. I'm a senior legal counsel with the Shell Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria. Should I say the work I do on the PIA it's been a long time coming. I've been monitoring the act since it was a bill for over a decade. And I also work with other industry operators to review the various versions of the bill and the act finally within the oil producers trade section, that's the OPTS. So in a nutshell, that's my own experience here. So.
Thank you very much for that. May I turn to Dr. Habib, who is joining us online?
Thank you very much, moderator. My name is Dr. No Habib. I'm an Executive Commissioner Development and Production in the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission. Coincidentally, also a member of the Presidential Steering Committee on Implementation of the PIA. My involvement in PIA pretty much dated back to quite a long while. On this specific milestone that we were able to collectively achieve, I was part of the team that developed the concept, designed the framework, and drafted the law. And now we are collectively putting all necessary machineries to ensure that we implement the intentment of the law as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Adefulu.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good afternoon to everyone on the panel, and good afternoon, SBL. I'm very glad to be here to join you virtually to speak on, well, Petroleum Industry Act, which I've spent, like members of the panel, I've spent many, many years working on. So I have advised private sector and the government, and worked very closely with Dr. Habib, as well as other members of the panel on different elements of the bill. So I look forward to talking about that, and also the fact that we've been advising both indigenous oil and gas companies and I would say the international companies on various aspects of implementing the Petroleum Industry Act. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I gave a brief overview of the PIA, and I mentioned that there are a number of issues that arise from its implementation, but we can't discuss everything here. In fact, there was a session on Wednesday, a half-day session, and even at that, we couldn't discuss everything. So this discussion, this panel will just focus on a few issues, and we'll start with the institutional reforms, the institutional framework. And so I'd like to ask Dr. Habib, we have new institutions that have been set up. What are the key differences between what we have now and the past regime? Is it just new names, new bodies, or is there something different that they offer?
Very much. Thank you very much. Okay. I think this is a very important question which underpins the philosophy of the PI itself. Typically, our institutional framework or the governance framework prior to now is flagged by a significant amount of confusion and amorphous nature, whether it's in the policy space, whether in the commercial environment, or whether in the regulatory space. And typically, like we all know, the Minister of Petroleum Resources used to be the policy anchor, the chief commercial custodian, and also the chief regulator of the country. And that's basically evidenced by the fact that the NNPC Act 1977 mandated the Minister of Petroleum Resources to be the chairman of the board of NNPC. If we go to the regulatory environment, the Minister of Petroleum rightly and aptly have direct responsibility to oversight and supervise the activities of the defunct DPR, which had the technical regulatory responsibility across the value chain. Now, of course, the policy space is its own, but because of where we are coming from, typically from history, from the military framework, migrating to democratic dispensation. NMPC now, over time, gained some capability and impetus to begin to play within the policy environment, which completely is not his space. In the other space, NMPC also, because the regulatory institution called Petroleum Inspectorate, which later transformed to the DPR, was part and parcel of the NMPC by law. So the NMPC sees itself also as a regulator. And that presents a significant amount of challenge and uncertainty in terms of really setting the rules straight ahead in terms of governance, because that means a businessman sitting somewhere in Singapore, anywhere in the world, there's no clarity. The minister is everything. The regulator doesn't have the enablement of doing what he has to do in terms of independence and sound legal framework. And also, the NMPC minister itself, his attention is diverted, is distorted into the either regulatory or policy framework. So the fundamental value with respect to difference from where we were and where we are today is the fact that for the first time, PIA put a governance framework that clearly sets rules and accountabilities across the policy, commercial, and regulatory space in the industry. And that's the reason why when you look at the law today, the ministerial powers have been purely constrained and reference to policy matters. The regulators, which is the Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority and the Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, they are basically contemplated and designed to be independent regulators that can have all the necessary enablement with respect to powers and accountability mechanisms to be able to not only regulate the industry, but also this time around serve as value enablers and investment enablers that can ensure that there is value creation to enhance shared prosperity in the industry. This is a very big difference. And that is why when we recall what the defunct DPR used to be, was simply called a technical regulator, which has no visibility around economic or commercial regulation. So what that did to Nigeria was that it weakens the ability of the regulator to create value, because if I give you a typical example, if I give you a field development plan approval, that means my field development plan approval does not or may not necessarily translate to an FID for that field development plan to be sanctioned. Why? Because it's only an approval that fulfills the technical requirement in terms of subsurface and facility engineering requirement to mature the field, produce the hydrocarbons, and evacuate them to the market space. So when you get that from the defunct DPR, you now have to go and talk to NAPIMS, because that's where the investment space lies. That's where the commercial space lies. And PIA said no. If we are to be effective as a regulator, if we are to create value for all stakeholders, you should have visibility around the technical perspective and the commercial framework. So that when you give an FDP approval, that field development plan is not only a field development plan that fulfills technical requirements in terms of geosciences of subsurface configurations, but it is also a field development plan that fulfills present economic realities that underpin the desirability of an investor to actually migrate to the point that he can put money on the table and implement the FID. That's a significant amount of difference. That's within the regulatory space. Prior to now, there was no transparency obligation enshrined in the regulator. But today, the regulator by law has to be transparent, has to be accountable. Now, if you move to the commercial space, NMPC, everybody knows, was simply a government corporation. Now, the law said, okay, NMPC, do business, generate money, run money, remove your costs, and pay everything to federation account. So that means when NMPC needs to invest capital, it has to go back to government handcapping, asking government, I need this amount of money out of the money I give you. And then because the money that NMPC remits to federation is a federation money, then government would look at it from a global national point of view and say, well, you are asking for $100 million, I can only give you 10. That's what basically led to the so-called cash call areas that we up to now, we are still struggling to basically get them through. Now, so PIA prescribed that, look, NNPC, you have to be a limited liability company. And today, definitely, 2-3 days ago, NNPC was unveiled as a limited liability company, and that set stage for a brand new mechanism of getting NNPC to profitability and accountability.